our addiction to our phone is affecting a lot of our life, our motivation for our goals, our relationships, our mood, our focus. About 5 years ago, I started really thinking, okay, I'm gonna try and cut the porn. And it's hard to completely cut porn, but I would say it's one of the most significant things you could possibly do in order to attain your dream life is cut it out. What you basically have to do if you see a shark in the ocean is you have to face towards it and put your hand out. And that's your highest likelihood of surviving that situation. If you turn and swim away, your legs are gone. Yeah.
What would be your biggest recommendation for somebody to maybe start achieving that?
In order to get into flow state, this deep state of focus,
Before we dive into this episode, I want to ask you to hit the subscribe button here on YouTube. It helps keep growing the channel and keep getting fantastic guests like this one. TJ, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
And we get to do it in person this time, which, as I was saying before it record, is such a pleasure to have watched how clearly and how articulately you're spreading this dose message now.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, I mean, I feel very passionate about these brain chemicals. I think lots of us are struggling with our mental health and lots of aspects of our life. And I really believe understanding our brain chemicals is such a clear answer for people.
One of the big words that I associate when I think of your content and I think about the dose effect is empowering.
Okay.
Because we are in a society where people are getting a lot of labels. They're maybe feeling less good about themselves than they have previously, even though if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, life nowadays is actually quite good in the grand scheme of things in terms of safety, life expectancy, etc. But general mood, aura, energy is down across the board, whereas your message is very much that doesn't need to be the case. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's a really powerful message for people to take on board rather than maybe wallowing in those kind of down feelings that they have.
Definitely. There is an answer to this challenge that we're facing. And there's also a very clear reason why our mood is struggling so much in the modern world. And whilst I am unsure as to whether society is making the best decisions at the moment with all the lifestyle stuff we have, I'm also super optimistic about the future for humans. I think we can get to a point where we are mentally thriving in this world.
Yeah, information's powerful, but action's even more so.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, again, I resonate so much with what you're doing. You're sharing these high-level, powerful concepts about brain chemicals. And what I love about the book in particular, and I'm sure we'll get into it loads as we talk, there's the challenge, there's the strategy, there's the gamified element of it. So it's not just a case of, hey guys, you should learn this about what's going on inside your head. It's, hey guys, here's the information, plus guess what, we're going to do some stuff off the back of it.
Definitely. And I always, as I began training lots of companies and schools in this model, I think a challenge-oriented approach is really good. Like as we discuss the different actions I'd guide people towards today, everything's going to include a very specific challenge someone can take on and add into their life, because I don't just want someone to listen and think, oh yeah, that was cool. Like I felt quite like inspired by some of those ideas. I just want like immediate change in daily behavior in order to cause the brain chemistry change that we're seeking.
Yeah, one of the things I've kind of railed against in recent years is what I call intellectual masturbation, and we're going to talk about real masturbation as this podcast goes.
Let's have both.
But intellectual masturbation is maybe people who are like, oh, I've read 52 books this year, or I listen to this podcast every time I go on my commute,
Mm-hmm.
but they aren't always able to associate it with things that they do off the back of it.
Okay.
And I would say those people are in a better position than people that are maybe just consuming junk.
Yeah.
But if you're consuming these things, it's great to relate it to something that you do off the back of it. And I'm sure there's lots of chemicals involved in actually going forth with that action as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for our dopamine to truly function well, we need to be taking action on the goals we have and not just aspiring to cool ideas and things we think would be good for us. And I think with content consumption, you're better off consuming a small amount of content that you really actually do something with, rather than just like mass filling your brain. And also with the whole health conversation, there are so many different pieces of advice that even if you look at food, there's like a million opinions. So I think it's better to try and find a lane that intuitively feels quite good for you and then really take action on it rather than consuming tons.
Yeah, spot on, TJ. Again, I think we relate a lot on these things. To start us off, what would you say are the biggest challenges facing us in the modern world, and why are we maybe feeling less good than we should?
100% I think it's the phone. I think the phone is what has changed in the last 10 years. I think since COVID, you'll notice that your addiction to your phone has got much, much more significant. The reason our addiction to our phone has changed so drastically is because of TikTok, because TikTok invented short form, fast video content. And obviously every platform is the same now. Nothing has ever stimulated humans' dopamine like short video and short, fast changing video. And our addiction to our phone is affecting a lot of our life, our motivation for our goals, our relationships, our mood, our focus. And we're in schools all the time. And when I'm in schools now, like a huge percentage of kids are now having to leave school because their mental health is suffering so much. And that was not a concept 10 years ago when I was at school. That was never something I'd heard of. Not one kid had that. And now a lot of kids are leaving school. And there was always alcohol and cigarettes and junk food, but it's the phone and specifically this short form video that's really challenging for the mind.
Something that I wrote down off the back of reading The Dose Effect was, and it was my own form of words, was that I believe that success leaves clues. So good feelings leave clues as to what gives us those good feelings. But also the reverse happens. So the bad feelings that we have leave clues as to what we should do less of. And I underline this word, this term in your book, human instinct. Our human instinct is telling us what we're doing is potentially wrong by making us feel worse. So you were saying there about the phone, somebody's leaving school because their mental health's deteriorated. There's been a period building up to that where their body and their mind have been telling them that how I'm spending my time is not good. Stop it. But we haven't stopped. And that's why we've tipped over.
100%. We have to be able to hear the negative emotion, the message that emotion is sending us. And it's not comfortable to hear the message of you feel depressed and you feel anxious and stuff. So it's very easy to just spend our life heading towards the next source of pleasure that will temporarily alleviate that pain. So if you feel super anxious and depressed and then you watch porn, during the period where you're watching porn, you're in no pain at all. Then you go on your phone for a bit longer and then you watch some more TV or Netflix or whatever it may be. And we're running away from the instinctive feeling that is being sent to us by our intuition as humans. And it's just important to understand at our core, humans are just incredible survival machines. We've survived for hundreds of thousands of years. We will have survived such difficult situations with like ice ages and all kinds of stuff, living out there in the wild. And our brain was extremely good for all of that time throughout evolution at reinforcing the positive actions and making us feel great when we spent 3 hours rubbing rocks together to make a fire and when we spent 5 hours out hunting for a deer. It was very good at telling us what we were doing right and making us want to do it more. In our modern world, we're receiving now the opposite message. When you feel really shit after watching porn because you're no longer pursuing going and trying to find a partner, the reason our brain is so good at making us feel shit about that is because it knows a world that is only watching porn and no longer finding partners is not a species that will survive long term. And it's important to start hearing the messages.
Yeah, don't ignore what your brain and your body is telling you.
Yeah, and it is uncomfortable. Like, I really struggle with this. And it's important to preface this at the start of this conversation because I'm not just some like neuroscientist that doesn't have like an addiction to my phone. I was struggling with all this stuff so much. Alcohol, partying, porn, social media, sugar, smoking, everything. I was screwed by it all. And I eventually got to this point where I was just not feeling good. Like, I felt low a lot of the time. My mood was so up and down. My attention was crap. My motivation was crap. And eventually I started going for long walks outside in nature without a phone and heard a message out there that my lifestyle needed to change. And like, we need to all start hearing that message.
I'm so glad you turned that corner. And I guess one of the things that is important about maybe those long walks that you were doing, and I know you went away to your grandfather's place in the country, you maybe removed some of the stimulus or the what I would call sedation that were there before. So when the uncomfortable feeling comes up, you're saying that somebody will watch porn or they'll scroll their phone. And I think we all know that feeling. And I know that when maybe I've been nervous about something, anxious about something, uncomfortable with what I might need to do next, I've done something between knowing about that and doing the thing that has sedated those feelings, but only temporarily. So by you going away from that, and the term I would maybe think of is like sitting in that emotion, that's what's allowed you to become the man that I get to talk to today.
It is, and it was hard to do that, to be honest. Like, when I went and started spending a lot more time in the quiet, like, I had so much negative shit in my head. Just
what was coming up?
So much like judgment to myself for how I was living my life. And whilst it was annoying, it was actually effectively a useful judgment to be occurring. Like, my brain didn't want me to be smoking every day or drinking every day and stuff like that. So my brain was trying to send me that message. And what I'd always find is I'd go for these walks, I'd have some negative thoughts for a period of time about different things in my life. But then those thoughts would like almost have their moment to be heard, and then they would begin to dissipate. And then for the last like 20 or 30 minutes of the walk, I'd actually start having loads of like cool creative ideas about like work or family or fun stuff I wanted to do or trips I wanted to take, whatever it might be. And I basically found that for so much of my life, I was just constantly distracting myself from these messages. But if you actually have a little bit of time where you hear them, then they actually have their moment to be heard. And then they're like, all right, I'm done now. You've had the message. And then you have really a nice time in your mind. And going towards the pain is very important. Like I was in Australia recently and we swam in Sydney Harbour, which is like the highest shark attack zone in the world apparently. And I hate the idea of getting killed by a shark like every human does. And I was learning about like what would you actually do if you saw a shark. And what you basically have to do if you see a shark in the ocean is you have to face towards it and put your hand out. And that's your highest likelihood of surviving that situation. If you turn and swim away, your legs are gone. And effectively with our emotions, it's actually a very similar situation. We basically have to turn and face the emotion. And it's very important that we actually learn to do it.
Away from the podcast, I work in sales and I've done a lot of sales coaching recently. And one of the phrases I always come back to is facts tell, stories sell. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what you've communicated there. Somebody could say, you must face the pain head on. You must take the challenge on. And that'll resonate a little bit. But when you explain it with a nice analogy about if you want to survive the potential shark attack, this is what you must do. And somebody then can be like, oh, here's an analogy. Let me apply that to my life.
And like I have this, like my challenge now that I face in my mind is like a lot of overwhelm in my brain of doing too much at once effectively. And that'll be like too much time on my phone, not necessarily mass consuming content because I've got quite good with that, but like too much WhatsApping and email and business stuff and things. My brain will get like really busy, and we can actually talk about this chemical called glutamate today as well if you like. It's a new area of research we're exploring, which is super interesting. But in that state, if I go from that super busy, overwhelmed brain to trying to do what I need to do, which is sit on the sofa and rest, I find it like so uncomfortable to then sit and do nothing because my brain's like jammed with loads of thinking. But I will know if I'm in that situation, if I go and put YouTube on, it will like calm that feeling. But that's not actually what my brain needs. And like a lot of the time I'm just trying to head towards the uncomfortable place. And I'm finding that the more frequently you head towards the thing you don't necessarily want, the actual happier I begin to feel day to day.
Yeah, that hormone, I'm really fascinated to learn more about it. And I think the type of people that listen to a podcast like my one, we've kind of shunned a lot of the bad behaviours that we're probably going to talk about, hopefully, to some extent. Some of us will still be dealing with them.
For sure.
But I relate so much to what you've just spoken about there, where I'm always on, I'm always busy. I'm juggling my sales directorship, my sales coaching, my podcast, my social life, my training.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of downtime. In fact, I use a time management hack called bundling, where a lot of the time I'm listening to a podcast for an upcoming guest, or I'm listening to an audiobook, or I'm listening to a Teams meeting while I'm on the go and doing things.
Yeah.
And I'm fitting lots in.
Yeah.
When I sit down and unwind consciously with one screen, in terms of like if it's Netflix or the football on TV and I put my phone out the room, that's when I actually start to down regulate and I benefit massively. So many of the people listening, the kind of type A go-getters that are like, let's get it, I actually come away from those situations charged up. And so like you, when you are having to sit on the couch and not put YouTube on, not put anything on, just try and deregulate a little bit.
Yeah.
That is so powerful for people like us.
It is. And it's just not a very nice experience. I do find nature specifically is obviously the best thing. If I'm in that environment and then like I feel all like stressed and shitty in my head, but then I'd like drive to like a forest or a walk I can do, and then I just start walking. That's then like active relaxation that really chills my brain back out. And obviously our focus in this conversation is these dose brain chemicals, but if we can touch a little bit on this glutamate chemical, it's just crazy because it's super interesting.
Yeah, great. Well, let's kick off with the D in dose, which is dopamine, and I think that's the one that the audience will have heard the most of, just in the world in general, because people are talking more about it already. For sure.
And I think people are now starting to understand like dopamine is like a motivation chemical and it affects that, and that it's like this pleasure chemical that's being impacted. I'd love to give you a bit of an explanation as to how this is actually operating in the brain so people can kind of imagine it more in their minds. We have this area of our brain called the ventral tegmental area, which is where your dopamine is being generated. You can imagine it as like a dopamine factory. And you can imagine in that factory, your brain has the capacity to build and manufacture little dopamine bubbles. They're called vesicles. And you can imagine they're all sitting there as like a little pile of bubbles in your dopamine factory. You then have an area of your brain called the nucleus accumbens, which is your reward center. if you're doing something hard and effortful, like say you were cleaning your house, when you were cleaning your house, a few of those bubbles would be getting shipped from the dopamine factory to the reward center every few minutes. And you'd feel a slight sense of satisfaction. Then say when you finished it and your house was already clean, it would ship an extra few of those bubbles to the reward center. And you'd have that feeling of like, oh, nice, I've cleaned my house. That feels good. When we open a social media app and we start scrolling the short videos, effectively what happens is the dopamine factory ships a lot of those bubbles towards the reward center. And that's why it feels really pleasurable. Like suddenly loads of dopamine is shipping towards it. It's like really pleasurable. But then after you've done the scrolling, the dopamine factory is then very low in that resource. The bubbles are low. And when we have a low amount of dopamine in that dopamine factory, that's when we're in this apathetic, low mood, can't focus state. And for so much of our day, we are spending our time mass shipping the bubbles out and not necessarily regenerating them very well. And that's why we're in this like low mood type demotivated place.
Cheap dopamine versus earned dopamine.
Yeah.
Big difference.
And that is the difference. And when you're earning the dopamine, your brain is sitting there making the bubbles, slowly shipping them over. And that's how the brain was evolved to operate. And when you're like, when you start scrolling porn, for example, like you're like, right, I'm going to have a wank. And then you open porn. And then as soon as you're even scrolling, before you've even clicked a video, your brain is just mass shipping the bubbles. And it feels amazing. You're like, wow, this is so stimulating. Then you click on a video and then another video and you're mass shipping it. But then everyone knows that like depressed type feeling you have after you finish watching. And that's because the dopamine factory is low in the molecule.
Yeah, the porn conversation fascinates me because you and I are, I'm slightly older than you, TJ, but we grew up in an era where it was pretty normal for you to get access to porn at a very young age on your phone. I was maybe like 15 or 16 when I've got my first smartphone, so I'm 32, so a little bit older. And by like 18, 19, you could pretty much see anything you wanted on the internet on your phone within minutes if you had Wi-Fi. And then now you've got data, so you can do it regardless.
For sure.
And that period, I think, has coincided with a massive decline in, one, how willing men are to go out there and expose themselves to challenges of real dating, and two, like sexual dysfunction, sexual kinks, all these different issues that are coming and hitting us all in the face now. Definitely.
My kind of theory that I have around porn, whether you're single or in a relationship, is the more virtual boobs you see, the less real ones you'll see. And if you're in a relationship and you watch a lot of porn when you're still in that relationship, I think you'll end up hanging out with your wife in a romantic, or your partner in a romantic way, a lot less, because you'll just be less motivated to engage in that behavior. And if you're single and you're constantly watching porn, your instinctive desire to get out there and go and find a girl or a guy that you want to like sexually connect with, it's going to be significantly less. And for me, I grew up, I think I was actually on a podcast recently, I was on an interview, and they said, when did you first see porn? And I was like really trying to think through that question. And I kind of based my ages on the house I lived in when I was kids, because I can always remember I left that house when I was this age and so on. And I realized that I actually saw porn before I was 9 years old, which is so early. I think I must have Googled something on like a family computer and seen porn. And then from like 11, 12, I was just always watching porn. Like it was just normal to me. All my friends were doing it. And I then did that for like a decade. Didn't think anything of it. Didn't think it was bad for me at all. And then when I really started to come to understand this whole dopamine factory thing and my dopamine level and how important my dopamine level was to me being able to attain my dreams, basically. The things I was setting out towards, I realized, well, if I'm low in dopamine, I'm never going to have the will to actually do the hard stuff to get them. And about 5 years ago, I started really thinking, okay, I'm going to try and cut the porn. And it's hard to completely cut porn, but I would say it's one of the most significant things you could possibly do in order to attain your dream life is cut it out.
Is one of the issues with it, after somebody ejaculates and finishes, the fact that they wouldn't have, it's come so easily versus maybe like approaching a girl in a bar, asking her out, taking her for a few dates, and then working your way up to actually having consensual sex, the two of you? It
is that difference of earning the dopamine or the cheap dopamine. And in the scenario where you're going up to the girl in the bar, that's terrifying. So that's good, outside of your comfort zone, and you're doing something challenging, and then you get there and you got to like engage with her and maybe say some nice things and seem interesting and ask good questions. And during all that effortful action, dopamine bubbles are slowly shifting from the factory to the reward center. Then eventually you go on a date, you get them dinner, you have good conversations, you get home, and you go through that whole journey of earning the experience of eventually the reward center having a load of dopamine in it. But it's a very slow, natural process. And porn is just the opposite. It's like, I'm scrolling Instagram, oh, she's quite fit, oh, I could watch porn right now, I'm on a porn app. And like the whole journey is complete in like 5 to 10 minutes. And that's just not how the brain evolved.
Yeah, one of my big concerns with porn is, and it's a British writer, social commentator called Mary Harrington. She talks about the law of fapentropy, and it's sort of a joke, but what you start watching is not what you finish watching, and that's not just within one session, but it's within years of watching. Potentially you need more excitatory power from what you're watching over time. So you may, like the first time you ever watch porn, you watch a guy and a girl and you're just like so turned on by it. It's unbelievable. It's like sensory overload. But over time you're searching for like different kinks or look, I need there to be 3 women, them all to be different nationalities and them all to do these different positions in order to reach the climax that they're looking for. And that for me can only be a bad thing when it comes to somebody having real, genuine, intimate sex, which is never going to be anything like what they see on a screen with paid actors doing.
Yeah, 100%. And your brain is just building tolerance. It builds tolerance to quick dopamine because our brain doesn't like the experience of mass shifting those dopamine bubbles out of the dopamine factory in such an increased way. So then it starts trying to downregulate the system and starts trying to produce less when you're watching the porn so that it doesn't have as much difficulty. So then you start upping the intimacy like level of whatever the intensity of whatever that porn is to try and keep getting that same level of bubbles to release from the factory. And it's tricky. And I was even having a conversation recently with someone who was saying like they feel really not that sexually driven with their partner and stuff like that, and they don't really like want to hook up with them. And porn and generally just like addictive behaviors can sort of be so strategic in which they can convince us to keep engaging with them. Because for this guy, he started having this thought in his head of like, maybe I need to watch more porn in order to identify what the thing is in porn that really turns me on so I can try that with my partner. And like, any addiction is very clever. If you look at like weed addiction, for example, when someone's addicted to weed, the weed is very good at convincing you that the weed is of mass benefit to your life. It's very strategic. The same with alcohol.
Don't remove me, let me stay.
Let me stay, because the brain doesn't like the idea of like, oh shit, but what if I lose this like really key resource? And in a situation where you're feeling less sexually driven to connect with your partner, more porn isn't the answer. Less porn, and then going through the detox and the crash that may occur from that, and then naturally, instinctively getting back into your own sexual desires is going to be the thing that creates the desire. But you've got to be careful of the voice on the shoulder that can fool you.
And it's really difficult to maybe have those conversations with your partner to say, I'm actually quite into this. And don't get me wrong, there's probably things that somebody would say they're into which would be a red flag and a problem, but more often not, if there's something that you like in terms of like, oh, I really like when you say this or when you do that, that's actually going to bond you far more than you squirreling away at night and going and watching something on your phone that your partner isn't fulfilling for you because you're maybe ashamed to talk about it, but you know you can get it easily through the phone.
Definitely. And a sort of scary, honest, open conversation like that is actually very good for the oxytocin chemical, the second one. So although that is a scary thing to do, that's a great thing to do. And with this whole dopamine conversation, I'm aware porn isn't the thing that some of your people may be interacting with a lot. Some people might not be watching porn, but just the basic idea of this chemical is really understanding that we want to try and reduce the amount of time we're spending in this mass, quick dopamine type lifestyle. And it could be porn, but it also could be sugar or alcohol or the social media videos, and try and increase the amount of effortful action we're doing to earn that chemical instead. I
want to share with you, TJ, where I've been thinking about dopamine a lot is I've been writing big slides and presentations for some of the sales coaching that I've done. So I delivered a workshop on Tuesday. It was maybe like 80 slides and there was a few interactive slides within it. So the majority of it was my content that I needed as prompts. I needed to learn it. When I get to a slide that I know, so for example, the objection handling section that I'm writing, I know what I want to say, but it's not always immediately forthcoming. So I'm writing the slide out, maybe Canva bugs a little bit. In that bug or that moment where I'm not sure what to write next, my brain is screaming at me to go and check LinkedIn or Instagram or reply to that email or text TJ to say you're looking forward to whatever, because it feels productive. And there are times when I switch between tasks and I get a lot done, but I know that I get way more done when I sit in something, and I feel incredible when the slide deck's finished. But my chimp brain is trying to drag me out of it sometimes and be like, yeah, like those DMs from those listeners, like I had an episode go quite viral, got a lot of new listeners. So people are engaging with the podcast, saying thank you very much. Please do share it to your story, leave a rating, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And I like going back and forth with listeners. It is wholesome and good, but it's not the thing that I said I was going to do when I said I was going to do it.
Yeah, and that's, especially managing social media is interesting, but whether you're a creator or you're just someone consuming social media, it constantly is distracting you away from the task at hand. And maybe something that's a situation there where you said like something bugged out, that's a key example where you're going to look for dopamine. But also when you're doing a task and it either becomes slightly too easy or too difficult, like a bit boring and easy or too difficult, immediately our brain goes, okay, let's shift and change. And I love doing DMs, for example. That's a real priority to me, is not to become a creator that just like stops doing the DMs.
You don't post and ghost, you engage.
Yeah, I really like it. And like, I just will see it as like an activity where that is the activity. So I'll go on Instagram. I predominantly, and we can talk generally about how to manage social media, but I predominantly interact with social media from my computer, not my phone. I'll go on Instagram on my computer and I'll just zone in. And for like 20 minutes, I just smash out typing replies. I can write nice big replies. I can send voice notes, whatever it might be. And it's just very important for our dopamine system to function in the healthiest way, to make sure that when you do a task, you absolutely nail that task. And if you're on a computer, it means not having like LinkedIn open on one of the tabs, for example. You need to try and create as much of a barrier as possible to just stay on what you're doing.
I was listening to the audiobook on the way over this morning from Glasgow to Edinburgh, and one of the strategies that I was recapping on was almost building up our ability to work in a flow state for longer.
Yeah.
What would be your biggest recommendation for somebody to maybe start achieving that?
In order to get into flow state, this deep state of focus, you need a pretty healthy amount of dopamine sitting in your brain in the first place before you even try and do the task. And what can typically happen is we'll sit down at our desk in the morning and we're like, okay, like I'm going to be really productive today. And then before we're like, okay, I'm not going to start quite yet. I'm just going to have a little check of LinkedIn, maybe a quick check of my Instagram. And you're not just delaying starting. What you're doing there is you're mass shipping those dopamine bubbles to the reward center and crashing your dopamine. So then when you eventually begin to start the task, you've got a much bigger mountain to climb in order to access flow state. Because to get into true deep flow state, you're going to need a really naturally elevated level. So I would say the first thing is waking up, not going on the phone, doing your normal morning routine if you can. If you have to have a very quick, like some kid or your partner has to receive a WhatsApp message, I would open the computer. Like I did this morning. Like I didn't go on my phone this morning, had my shower, did my meditation, and then I open the computer at the desk. I do a few WhatsApps, and then it's like boom, straight into the task at hand. It's very important to just start as quickly as possible.
Really impressed by that, and I completely resonate with that. I know that when I get into a cycle of messaging and checking, it becomes exactly that, a cycle, and it becomes very hard for me to not continue doing throughout the rest of the day.
For sure.
And that is a real issue and a potential problem.
And it's hard to do this. It's not this like, oh, now it's so easy, I'll just get into flow state all the time. But it's like something you can train your willpower over time to become better at. And WhatsApp, for example, is another one of these really distracting things where it is productive, like you might be talking to your team members and stuff like that, but it's also not necessarily the most important thing for you to be working on in that moment. So
it's not the dial mover.
It's not the dial mover. And it's like this morning we're launching this new research study at university on Monday, and people will be going through these big dose trials and getting assessed before and after and stuff like that on all the different measures of their brain chemistry. And this morning I needed to work on that deck, for example. And if I had like woken up, kind of gone on my phone for a bit and then chatted to my girlfriend for a while and then done, like if I'd done all that, I would have entered low dopamine, and then I would have had to sit down and try and do this task. It would have been hard. Whereas if I just wake up, shower, open the laptop and just try and hammer it, it was done so quickly. The thing I needed to do was done so fast.
That's so impressive though, because you understand how your chemicals are working and then you're actioning it in reality. And I completely resonate with that experience of if I can do the thing before I deplete myself, then I'm going to benefit massively. And one of the things that I've been doing for my dopamine, but also just for general resilience, which I'm sure relates, is we've got a new spa at David Lloyd in the West End in Glasgow.
Nice.
And we've got the sauna, which we've always had, but we've now got a cold dip, which is actually pretty cold. The one they had before was like 12 degrees or something like that. This one's a lot colder. So you actually get the real buzz of it. And I always go a morning walk, always have. I'll listen to a podcast, listen to an audiobook, but sometimes I'll walk at David Lloyd on the treadmill and then I'll go down into the spa, 15 minutes hot, 3 to 5 minutes cold.
Oh, that's a lot.
Depending how cold it is.
If it's cold, that's
depending
a long
how
time.
cold it is. I've started to build it up, which has been good. The coldest one I've been in is about a 3-degree one, and I managed like 2 to 3 minutes. So I've gotten better at it. I've managed to control my breathing rather than like losing. You know, your heart rate goes up so fast. You need to try and control it.
Yeah.
So I feel unbelievable.
Yeah.
After the cold, and what I'm also trying to do is not go in the hot straight afterwards. I'm trying to let the chill go through me for a little bit more before I level back out. And like the next like 2-3 hours of my actual work and the calls that I'm on, I'm articulate, I'm verbose, I'm excitable, I'm energized, and I'm quite, like the whole modern phrase, I'm locked in, bro.
Yeah, it's so interesting, the cold water immersion, because in this cold water, you're not actually shipping loads of dopamine to the reward center. You're not actually creating pleasure in that way. You're forcing the ventral tegmental area, the dopamine factory, to build dopamine because it's preparing itself for like something that requires a lot of motivation and focus is coming in my direction because I'm in like a potentially a hostile environment effectively. So then you're like raising the amount of baseline production that your brain can create. And then when you come out of there and then you say you're so productive and locked in, that's because the dopamine factory is like, fuck, like I've got a lot of this stuff. Tell me when you need it. And that's a great place to be. I think the most useful time to use cold water immersion is when you're in a slightly more demotivated, apathetic state. I sometimes think with the cold, at least recently, if you are someone that's hyper productive and you're doing loads and loads already, I actually sometimes think heat might be a better thing for your body. And you could like, because the heat has more of a calming effect on our system and the cold has more of like a ramping you up. And I think both are ridiculously useful and people just are in different situations in their day-to-day life. So I sometimes think looking at your days and stuff, am I more easing towards like burnout and I've done too much? That would be, heat would be great. If it's, I'm actually not doing enough and I really want momentum, cold would be great.
That's interesting. In the kind of split personality world of Colin, I would do, if I'm getting to the spa later in the day, so in the evening, I would do hot only to try and get me a little bit more parasympathetic.
Yeah.
I would not do cold later on because I find it hard to unwind and sleep.
Yeah, it riles you up.
I can be a little bit too intense, which makes a big difference. One of the things that I wrote down about dopamine was we get anticipatory dopamine.
Yeah.
And your wonderful girlfriend's joined us today in the studio, and I was talking to Georgia about, I started the podcast in April 2020. I've been a guest on like 5 or 6 during 2019, really enjoyed the process, told my Instagram story, like I'm going to start my own podcast, like I really like the format, I think I can contribute well. And the praise was unbelievable. Like, not on the level it is now, but people were like, oh, I think you'd have a great podcast, like you came across really well, you're quite articulate, you're well spoken, you've got good questions, you're insightful. That praise was enough for me to get a level of dopamine, which was enough for me to not launch the podcast.
Interesting. Okay.
Until lockdown came round. Now I started it, had Chris Williams as my first guest. I've not stopped since. It's been amazing, right?
Yeah.
But there was an element of like, by sharing a goal and sharing what I'm going to do, people praised you and you got a level of like anticipatory dopamine without actually doing the thing, which is so dangerous.
Very dangerous. And of course, having goals in your life are great, and having like a person in your life that you're kind of strategically talking to about, this is my goal and this is the game plan to get there. That's like a cool thing to be doing. But mass sharing, like I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, it's very rewarding for your brain because our brains are like simple how they operate, and your brain will be getting dopamine because it's like if I was in a hunter-gatherer tribe and I was like walking around the group saying, I'm going to catch an unreal deer today, I'm going to catch an unreal deer today, of course my brain would create dopamine because it thinks I'm trying to motivate myself towards going and catching that deer. So it's like a good mechanism to do. However, you could be the guy to just keep saying, I'm going to go catch the deer and then not go catch the deer.
Yeah,
so you got to be
all
careful.
bark, no bite.
Yeah, and you got to be... It is a risky game, and some of the biggest, most strategic goals that I'm working towards in my life, basically no one knows. Like they're just in my mind, and I'm just doing the things each day that I know move me in the direction of it occurring one day.
Yeah, really impressive again. And the other way that I've thought about anticipatory dopamine, and I learned this from you as well, if I'm trying to be phone free more often, so if my brother and I are watching the Rangers game on the TV, or I've been dating more seriously recently, if we've been like having dinner, if one of us goes on our phones, I almost feel compelled to check
For sure.
my phone. And I've been guilty of being the one that goes on the phone, but I try as much as possible keep phones away and have like one screen or one conversation.
Yeah.
But by seeing somebody pull out their phone and check their DMs or their emails, my brain is screaming at me to do the same.
Yeah, and just for context of why that's so useful that your brain would do that, if I was sitting in the tribe, and I keep coming back to this because this is what we did for 300,000 years, and we've been doing this modern thing for literally a blink of an eye. So like that's what our brain is designed to do. If I was sitting in the tribe, like by my hut doing nothing, and then I saw a group of the guys like pick up all their like equipment in order to go find food, my brain needs to experience a rise in dopamine to say, go do the same thing because we need to go and hunt. Like it makes sense that we'd be motivated by someone else's action. And in that situation, when I see them going to do that, my brain would ship dopamine from the factory to the reward center to try and get me to take action towards the goal. And the same thing happens. As soon as your brother takes the phone out, your brain starts shipping dopamine, thinking, oh, I could get dopamine as well. It's just like a confused mechanism in the modern world. And it happens with phones, it happens massively with alcohol. Like when you see someone drinking alcohol, like you walk past a bar in summer and they're having a glass of rosé, you're like, fuck, I want a glass of rosé. And it's because your brain is anticipating the idea of getting the dopamine.
It's so clever, isn't it? But I love the way that you're able to explain it.
Yeah, because these are all useful mechanisms, but just not working as usefully now in this modern world we've created.
Definitely. One of the last things I want to ask you about dopamine is around the anterior midgillate cortex. If I pronounced that
Anterior
right?
mid-cingulate cortex. Yeah,
Perfect.
Pretty close.
So I first heard about this when Huberman had David Goggins in his podcast.
Oh, cool.
Now,
Yeah,
Goggins,
he will have a good AMCC, that guy.
100%. But he didn't realise the mechanism that he was working on.
Okay.
But he was building what he called willpower and resilience.
Yeah.
And Huberman explained that it was the AMC that was building up because he was continually making difficult choices over time. And those choices were getting progressively harder, or the tasks he was doing were getting progressively harder.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I use as a little mental framework sometimes is you're building your AMC by resisting.
Yeah.
So sit in the challenge of writing the presentation, Colin, or sit in the challenge of writing the show notes for the podcast that comes out on Sunday, because it's like the last thing you need to do before it all goes out and you're like, oh, like I'd much rather approach another guest, or I'd much rather research another guest. No, write the show notes, get them up and get it done. By sitting in the hard thing, I feel like I'm building it almost like a muscle.
Definitely. You are building it like a muscle, and it's just important for humans to understand that a huge proportion of being a human is doing things we don't want to do. And that's just like reality of being human. Like they wouldn't have wanted to spend the hours making the fire, but if you didn't make the fire, you'll die that night. So it's like we had to be able to do things we didn't want to do. And this anterior mid-cingulate cortex, whenever you make yourself do something you don't want to do, it lights up and it activates and it gets stronger over time and larger. Literally, you'll see people, for example, like super agers, people that live plus 100, they have enlarged AMCCs. And there's a real relationship. Like the majority of people that go past 100 probably have made a lot of good decisions throughout their life on their food and their social lives and their exercise and everything. And this area gets stronger and stronger the more you do things you don't want to do. Cold water immersion has such a big domino effect on people's lives because it's so horrific that then doing other things you don't want to do becomes easier, and you start doing more and more things like that. And in our modern world, so much of the time, we just do the thing that we know we shouldn't be doing, but we're just like, oh, fuck it, I'm just going to do it anyway. Like, I'm just going to watch the porn, I'm just going to pick up my phone. And in that scenario, it's underactivating this area of the brain and getting smaller and smaller. And you can imagine for a lot of us, this like willpower center is now weak, and it's very important to strengthen it.
Yeah, I've actually physically bought one of the timers that you recommend.
Yeah, okay.
Because again, I encourage people to buy the book, but one of the exercises was around timing how long you can stay in the one task, and then going over to your phone to check how long it's been going for. So whether it's been 3 minutes, God forbid, or 20 minutes or 25 minutes, amazing as you start to build that up. But buying a physical timer also enables me to eliminate the phone from the physical environment entirely. So I've started to, well, it's on its way from Amazon again. I've read the book and I was listening to the audiobook, and I'm like, it's almost like reinforcing the lessons each time. I'm somebody that learns in two domains, probably, I would say.
That's awesome. And the more you can just test out these challenges and complete them over time. And even something like that, like I grew up as a kid that had no focus. Like I was a nightmare in school. I didn't do very well in all my exams until I got to college and found psychology. I was basically screwed with education. And when I started writing the book, I was like, wow, I need to really get into flow state to write this book. Like it's no joke when you sit down and try and write like 70,000 words. Like you've really got work. I remember when I was at uni and I used to have like essays that were like 5,000 words, and they were so much effort. And then suddenly the publisher was like, yeah, we want 70,000 words. I was like, what? That's a lot. And then I started having to really gamify with myself. How the hell am I going to get myself to concentrate? Because if I just sit there, bit of the Google Doc and then a bit of LinkedIn, a bit of Instagram, this book was going to take me years to get it done. And I didn't want it to take years. I wanted to get it done. And I then started this process of really gamifying, like how many minutes can I actually stay on this Google Doc for without moving? And even something like when I was identifying research, like what I would do is I would write some like key element that I knew from psychology and neuroscience about a concept around the AMCC, for example. When I first started writing, I'd write that sentence and then I'd go and find the name of the right study, and then I'd go back and forth, but it was making me change app. And then I was realizing that changing app was then creating desire for other apps, and it was creating a difficulty. So then I started writing in a way that was like writing out everything, but then just leaving these like blank gaps wherever research was required. And then I'd go through and I'd almost flow state finding the research and flow state finding the writing. And that's obviously a niche example, but whatever your working life is, the more you can single task it, the better.
Yeah, anyone can relate to that when they've maybe been building some slides for work or building an email out or building a presentation. You can relate to when you switch between the tasks, the presentation that you've earmarked 30, 40 minutes for, and I would encourage people to time box.
Yeah.
It just expands and expands and expands when you're going between the two.
It does. And it's so satisfying to just get what needs to be done. And that's the way to do it.
Absolutely. You say that we've moved away from an oxytocin world towards a more dopaminergic world.
Yeah.
Why is that?
At our core, we are a very social species that puts love basically at the highest thing we desire. Like nothing is more magical as a human than like maybe having a baby or falling in love with a human or having really intimate fun time with your friends or a nice conversation with your dad. Like human connection is at the core of what we desire as a species. And that is now going at the downfall to our desire to constantly dopamine our brain instead. And to put that into like a really simple example, sitting in bed with your partner, both scrolling your phones instead of sitting in your bed chatting and cuddling and maybe having sex, like that is choosing dopamine over oxytocin. And that's happening in all scenarios, like in the evening, like choosing to be on your phone for hours instead of interacting with your kids or whatever it might be. We are constantly choosing pleasure over connection in the modern world. And the more we can prioritize the oxytocin chemical, the less desire we end up actually having for the dopamine overall, because it's a more fulfilling and calming experience, the feeling of love, than the feeling of pleasure. And it's really important that we start raising the oxy.
What does low oxytocin look like?
You'll feel kind of lonely and socially isolated and a bit disconnected from people. And then another really fascinating element of it is it's really going to affect the conversation that's happening in your mind if you're low in oxytocin, and really affect kind of how you perceive yourself and how confident you are. There's this fascinating study where they use what's called intranasal oxytocin, which you can literally inhale artificial oxytocin, which isn't a good way to increase it, but it is a good way from research to see what happens in the brain, because it's a nice like controlled measure. And if you take like a group of what you call trait anxious men, like a group that are quite like anxious in their minds and quite critical in their minds and worried in their minds, and you give them intranasal oxytocin, immediately they begin to positively self-attribute. They start to talk to themselves in their head in a much more positive way. And it's really clear that the amount of oxytocin in our brain is actually impacting how we perceive ourselves in our mind and how we show up in our social confidence and so on. So it's an important chemical.
Yeah, that low quality of self-image and self-worth coming from a hormone being low in the head. I mean, it's great that we can link these things, but worrying how big an impact that's having, particularly as you said, we've moved away from so many oxytocin-promoting behaviours towards dopaminergic behaviours. Yeah. So no wonder we have the whole loneliness epidemic that people talk about, and I think post-C19 it's maybe even worse.
Definitely. I run Dose as like a membership that people can be a part of, and when I started running it, my goal was just kind of provide the most strategic dose boosting behaviors I could. But I was so surprised at how lonely humans actually are, and how much a big percentage of the people that come and join this membership were coming just because they want some kind of sense of belonging and community. And people are really struggling. Like people went into this kind of COVID isolated work from home lifestyle, and I think a huge proportion of us never really came back out of that way of operating. And because we have this like dopamine that we can get at home all the time from the sugar and the phone, it's kind of like moderately satisfying all those human needs we would actually have to go out there and connect and be like a proper functioning human. If we just scrap the dopamine, if there was no more phones, everyone would be out there connecting with each other because we were so bored. But now we're kind of like missing that real desire, and we got to get it back.
Yeah, one of my friends is a primary school teacher, and he speaks about how different the kids are versus when we were at school, but even the generation, or not generation, but maybe 5-10 years before. So when you ask the kids what they're doing after school, it'll be, PlayStation, YouTube. Some of them can't even say what they're doing, but what they're doing is just scrolling their phone. Sure. Like they don't maybe have hobbies in the same way.
Yeah.
Whereas if I think about my schedule as a kid, it was like Cubs, rugby, tennis,
Yeah.
golf. I know you were a really keen golfer. I certainly wasn't as good as you were, TJ. But all these different things that were filling up my day and my time, I could really clearly earmark what I was up to and what I was doing. Whereas I think there's a trend nowadays for a lot of modern kids to maybe not have the same level of hobbies and things that they spend their time doing.
Definitely, like the phone is the hobby now, which is super sad. And when you look at all those actions you were saying you were doing, it's not just the fact that meant you were off your phone as a kid, but then you were doing all those other things that are ridiculously good for your brain chemistry. Any kind of sport and social activity that's outdoors, that's just all our brain wants. Like that's all it did for hundreds of thousands of years, run around outdoors with your friends. And when we look at young people now, we're really trying to help them identify like what is something I could actually do that's off this phone. And one of the best ways you can do this as an adult or a young person, is look at your social media feed on your Reels or your TikTok and identify the most frequently occurring content. The reason that content is the most frequently occurring, whether it's cooking or sport or music or art or cleaning, the reason it's occurring so often is because that's your thing. That's your thing that you should be out there doing. But instead, as a society now, we're spending our time watching other people in our flow state instead of doing it ourselves effectively.
Yeah, watching others that are doing what we want to do, but we haven't taken action to do.
Yeah, like I freaking love watching like really cool aesthetic nature hiking videos on Instagram and YouTube and stuff like that. I find it really cool. And I had this realization a few years ago. I was like, I don't really do that very often, but I'm just watching other people do it. And I'm changing what would be an amazing brain chemistry activity of hiking out in nature with my girlfriend or friends or on my own, whatever it might be. I'm changing what could be amazing to something that is quick dopamine and shit for my brain. And it's basically the same activity, but one involves my active engagement and one's a passive scrolling version.
Yeah, one's like a dystopian online world and one's actually doing it.
We've got to actually do the thing instead of just watch the thing. Like loads of people love watching cooking videos, like when it's really aesthetic and like ASMR of all the chopping and cooking and frying and eating everything. And then we just make like a little shitty meal for ourselves. And it's like, no, if you love watching that, you should do it too.
Yeah. Don't just consume, create. What are some of the other ways to boost our oxytocin, TJ?
Any time in which you contribute to another human being's life, that's really at the core of this chemical. And there's a great psychologist called Marsh who does a lot of research into this. And effectively, our brain is just designed to be selfless. It's not designed to be a selfish brain. If our brains were instinctively selfish and I went out and caught the deer and then just sat out there and like ate it on my own, didn't bring it back to the group, like that would be terrible for our survival. And every day, just like thinking, how am I contributing to other people's lives is really important. That can be very simple stuff. That can be like when you walk into a coffee shop, making sure you smile at the barista and ask her how her day's going instead of just like staring at your phone and saying, coffee, please. Like it's just like tiny little things, being more complimentary to people, buying someone a coffee, buying someone some flowers occasionally. Hopefully my girlfriend can't hear me right now, but what I do is I often go to the supermarket in the evening. I'll be getting like some yogurt or something like that. And I'll always look at the discounted area of flowers. And sometimes you can get like nice flowers that are like going to die soon for like £1. And like, so it's like very affordable to get them. And I'll get them and I'll come home and it will change her like whole evening when I walk through it, and it's cost me nothing. And it will change her whole evening because I've just like done some kind of
act of kindness. Yeah,
act of kindness.
That's
and I
something
would just be thinking about that.
Yeah, that's something that's come more into the forefront when people have been talking about the love languages. So like one of the love languages is like acts of service. Acts of kindness.
Service. Yeah.
And that there is, well, you've given a gift, you've done something that's, you know, is going to give that person pleasure. And it's been relatively low cost to you. But it's more of a signal of how much you care about them.
It is. It's just that you're thinking about them. And humans want to feel like seen and acknowledged and recognized. Like a simple oxytocin activity we get people to do is to go for a walk with someone they care about. It could be a girlfriend, it could be your kids, it could be a friend, whoever. And you ask themselves the question while you're wandering along, why do you feel grateful to have me in your life? And they'll be like, whoa, that's a big question. But they will be able to answer the question. They will have an answer to that question of the different ways in which you contribute to their life, whatever it may be. And then they ask you the question back and you also answer it. And in this moment, you both feel so seen and acknowledged for who you are as a human being and all the effort you're putting into that relationship. And this really loving, calming emotion arises. And that is oxytocin.
Talk to me about the element of physical touch when it comes to oxytocin.
Yeah, it's massive because when we're first born, we just enter physical touch paradise, basically. We go into like breastfeeding and our mum holds us like all the time, or our dad or our caregiver, whoever
There's
it
always
might
the
be.
photo of the baby with his head in the dad's chest.
Yeah, and that's like a big
bonding
moment. And that's huge for the dad. Like I can't wait to hopefully have that moment one day. And I really can't wait. That'd be so cool. And these moments in our early life are very calming for us because humans are born prematurely compared to all other species. That's quite interesting. When our brain started getting a lot bigger and becoming more advanced, we had to start giving birth earlier. It was actually hypothesized that we used to give birth at about 12 months. The baby would be bigger. Like, you know how when a horse is born, it's born like ready to rock, basically. Babies are born very prematurely, and they really, when they're not now born prematurely, but relatively speaking, as our evolution went. And we just are completely incapable when we're born, basically. So it's very scary to enter a world where you can do nothing at all. And therefore, the safety of our parents around us is very important. And any time in which we feel distress and fear and anxiety as a little baby, the way in which it's settled is through physical touch. And our brain is just biologically programmed that if touch happens, it means safety and it means we're no longer in danger. And in our modern world, like, touch is just rapidly reducing. At Dose Lab, where we do our research, we always ask people how many hugs do they average a day. And the number of, like, I think about 70,000 people that we've done this with is about 1.2 hugs a day. When I do this in schools, it's like 0.4. It's like humans are just not physically interacting with their parents, their friends, their partners as much. And for our system, for our neurobiology, it needs it. It literally needs touch.
I've always been a handshaker, but I gave you and George a hug when I
did?
arrived because I'm learning that how important it is.
It's really cool.
And it is really important that you show that level of comfort with somebody as well. Because again, that's a signal that we trust each other, because from a cleanliness and a germs perspective, we're happy to interact. And I think C19 had a big impact on that as well.
It did. It stressed us out.
That elbow thing, oh my goodness.
It was awful. It was awful, that elbow thing. Let's not do that one again. And when we, like, I remember there were periods where you, like, had to see your parents or something in COVID, and, like, you weren't even allowed to go and hug them. We'd, like, stand distanced apart if you weren't living together and all that kind of stuff. And, like, there was such a strong instinctive desire to, like, I just want to go and hug that human. And I'm sure some people did secretly hug those people, like, if they felt like they really wanted to hug them. And we really just need that experience of connecting. Even, like, in the schools, for example, young girls in schools are really struggling with their mental health. It's a very hostile environment. In general, being a teenage girl is quite hostile, with, like, all the, like, complications in friendship groups. But now we've added, like, Snapchat and social media to that. It's very scary to try and, like, make sure you fit in and have a sense of belonging. And even then, when they go through dose in their schools and they all start hugging each other more when they get to school, immediately they just feel like a safety and, like, more of a, like, oh, I'm not in danger when I'm at school, like, I have this group. And we really underestimate just immediate physical touch. Very important.
It's really reassuring. That's one of the terms that springs to mind for me.
Yeah, and it's something you can just easily do more of. You can easily just hug people more often. And, like, if you don't like hugging people, you can also hug a pet.
Of course. Let's talk about the S then, serotonin. What does low serotonin look like?
It's a irritated, very thinky type brain, a brain that's all, like, worried and overthinking. And it's also a very tired brain. And you'll see those go quite hand in hand. Like, if you're really overthinking, irritated in your mind, thinking lots, you'll also probably feel pretty exhausted. And we are all pretty low in serotonin. Like, even my constant journey of trying to make sure I optimize these chemicals, serotonin is a chemical I know my brain continues to be low in, but I'm working on it.
Well, serotonin is the big one that people try and address when it comes to medications, isn't it? Like SSRIs are related to serotonin, albeit I've got maybe different views on what that might look like sometimes. But for me, when I think about natural serotonin, I'm always encouraged as to what I can do to try and keep me at a level.
Yeah, definitely. And is this chemical that's going to have a big impact on our mood. That's why, like, SSRIs and stuff can provide people with this opportunity to lift their mood. And I think there's a lot of good natural actions we could be taking in order to get these serotonergic benefits.
Yeah, I'm all about the empowerment word that we used at the start. What can we do within our own lives to try and improve our serotonin? And one of the first ones I want to ask you about is sleep.
Sleep is big. Sleep is so good for our serotonin. And it's interesting because serotonin and melatonin have a big relationship. Serotonin is like a precursor to melatonin, and melatonin is this great chemical that puts us to sleep at night. Melatonin gummies and stuff have become like a big thing, particularly in America, in order to help sleep. So we're really looking at two elements. One is, if we can get really high serotonin levels throughout the day, we're going to build more melatonin that's going to help us sleep better. But then also, if we sleep better, we're going to wake up with higher serotonin levels. So it's like a double whammy, and it's really important to, like, optimize our sleep as much as we can.
Yeah, really cool. Talk to me about optimizing sleep then. What steps do we need to take?
The biggest step is not having the charger plugged next to the bed for the iPhone. And I appreciate it's such a hard step to take, but it's 100% the most important thing that society can do. And you can kind of ease into this, and I have, like, a whole game plan as to how you can over a long period of time ease the tech away from you at nighttime. But obviously, if we didn't have the phones, we would all just get into bed and go to sleep. Like, you might lie there awake because you're bored, but you'd eventually go to sleep. Whereas obviously lying in bed, scrolling the Instagram and little few checks of the email and then some WhatsApp, so it's just keeping us awake. Then if we're checking the phone in the night when we wake up, when we can't sleep, that very rapidly wakes us, and then we stay awake for longer.
And the blue light plays a role there as well.
Blue light plays a role, it really wakes our brain. And then potentially you might consume some stressful information, and that really wakes your brain. And I'd basically start with the journey of charging the phone the other side of the room, so that at least you have to like go and put it on charge and then get back into bed. If you're really struggling with the situation of like, I need some sound playing at night, like I do understand that. I've actually had my own struggles with that need for sound at nighttime. I would say you'd be so much better off like getting a tablet, an iPad, for example, finding a long podcast, this podcast, for example, or like some kind of audiobook or some kind of like slow Netflix content, something that's just sound, that's calm and low stimulation. And then putting that iPad maybe like a meter away from your bed, so you can't go and like touch it and interact with it, and then clicking play and then lying in bed and falling asleep. I don't think that is that bad for your sleep, but the lying in bed checking the phone is carnage.
It's like weaning you off it, isn't it, by having that longer form content? Because one of the big things I've learned from you is to switch from short to long is better for your parasympathetic and the stimulation you're getting.
Definitely.
So if you were to, like, I'm a big fan of no phones in bed in terms of like my phone charges outside the room. I've started using an alarm clock. Again, environment design is helpful for ticking the box that I want to tick. But if I was to watch something in bed, I would watch a full podcast or a full movie. Whereas if I watched TikTok or Reels or YouTube Shorts, then the difference in how wired my brain feels is night and day.
It's massive. And some people have almost got into a routine of like watching so much short form content in bed that eventually it wears you out to the point where you will fall asleep. Like you actually like tire your system into sleep. But that is a nightmare for waking up and having high dopamine levels and being able to take action. Like a lot of kids will lie in bed and like TikTok their brain to sleep basically. And if you can orient towards the longer form content, is so much better. Whenever we're watching the longer form content from a dopamine perspective, it's slowly shipping those bubbles from the factory to the reward center in comparison to the shore. The other thing about the phones in bed is if you are in a relationship, like we went through a period where I was like weaning myself off of this, like an addiction, like gradually easing off it. And one thing I would say is I really believe sex life is very important in relationships for humans. I think having sex is an important part of being a human being if you can, or at least just like cuddling and kissing and just being close with one another. It's very important for all that oxytocin. If you stop having technology in bed, you'll lie there and just be bored and then probably have sex more than if you constantly are on your phones. Like it has been really good for our sex life to just not have the phone, because eventually you're just going to do something with that time
that occurs
instead.
Naturally to you and feels like you're not being distracted by something else. Because I think a lot of our phones is distraction.
It is. And you sit there, you wear out the dopamine, and then you're in low dopamine, and then having sex is like the last of your brain's priority. It's, I'll probably just go to sleep now. Because if you lie there bored, your brain might want some dopamine, and then it can kind of get that from like stimulation and proper human connection, which is a much more natural thing for our brain. And again, like it doesn't mean you have to have sex every day for your brain, but even just like lying there and holding hands with each other, or cuddling, or having a nice conversation, or we'll do a cool thing where we try and like really reflect on our day and think about what we're grateful for that day and what kind of went well with our work or something like that. But we just need to come more away from this digital focused living and more towards human living.
I know a big part of the quality of sleep at night starts with what we do in the morning. What would be your advice?
When you wake up? Yeah, when you wake up, definitely do not go on the phone. This is the first step in the whole dose journey when we do it as this like challenge form for our research. The first step is we get the phone addiction broken when we wake, because if we were, for example, to wake up and have half a glass of red wine every morning, the speed that you would enter alcoholism would just be insane. Like you'd obviously be so addicted to alcohol if you had red wine when you woke up every day. And that's what we're doing with the phone. We're making the addiction so much stronger because we're letting ourselves have it straight away. So you wake up. If you struggle with like needing to snooze your alarm, snoozing is not good for our brain. It creates this thing called sleep inertia, which really delays our brain's ability to get going. I do struggle with needing to snooze an alarm, so I will sit on the side of the bed. Like I'll wake up and I'll sit on the side of the bed so I can't go back to sleep. Once I've eventually got the courage to just walk to the bathroom, I go straight to the bathroom and start brushing my teeth. So it's an effortful action, building those dopamine bubbles. I'll then splash cold water on my face. If it's a day where I need to get going very quickly, I'll have my shower, come back, make the bed, and start work. If it's a day where I have time and there's light by this time, depending on what time I've woken up, then I'll go for a walk in the morning. And I think if you can have the walk, that's amazing. But I think the most important thing is no phone when you wake.
And it's doing something effortful. Brushing the teeth, only doing that.
Yeah.
I've heard you say before, if somebody's inclined to maybe take their phone to the toilet and they're sitting there in the toilet kind of unloading from the night before, don't take your phone, take a book with you.
Yeah.
And you've literally switched the challenge of reading to try and understand what you're reading and focus on to the easy stuff of like ping, 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 all the messages that you got when you were asleep or all the new stuff on social media you've missed in the last 8-9 hours that you've been in bed.
Definitely. And I'm someone that I struggle with reading. Like reading, it's a really effortful task now these days. And for the last few years, I've managed to churn through books really, really slowly, but I have actually managed to get through quite a few books. And the only reason I've done that is because I go to the bathroom every morning and I always have a book sitting there and I'll read 4 or 5 pages, but it's every single day. So I'm always just gradually chipping my way through them. Sometimes if I really like the book, I read it on the sofa in the evening, but to be honest, that's rare. So it wouldn't happen with the dose book though. You definitely want to read that. But I would say,
I found it extremely easy to read because when I read something that's actionable, I'm much more inclined to do it. And that's just how I'm wired and how a lot of people listen to this will probably feel the same.
I definitely wrote it with the need for quick changing information in mind, to make it quite dopamine-y for people. But yeah, reading in the morning is amazing. But the most important thing is you're just gaining momentum before you enter quick dopamine land.
Interesting that's been happening for me recently. I've always been good at getting to bed early, but waking up early, I have to be in bed early enough for me to wake up early.
For sure.
But I also have to feel an element of, I don't want to say excitement, but for what I'm going to be working on that day.
Yeah, that's fair.
So this week has been so full on for me. I could deliver the 5-hour workshop on Tuesday.
Wow.
Had a podcast yesterday. Alongside my day job, we're tendering for a contract that's worth about $750,000, and bearing in mind I did 1.7 million pounds of sales last year, so it's gonna massively increase what I've delivered for the business.
Okay.
And I was super excited for today, TJ. Obviously, we got on great last time. I knew we were going to have a great conversation today. We're in full flow today. I woke up this morning, before my alarm or near my alarm, because I've been waking up at the same time every day, with a little bit of a spike of maybe cortisol.
Yeah, potentially. A bit
wake
of
up,
adrenaline
you've got the train. You've got the train at 7:30. You want to wake up at 6:20 so that you can have your supplements, have your water, do a little bit of stretching.
Nice.
Put some notes in your diary about what you want to do for the day and reaffirm what you've time blocked out.
Cool.
I felt buzzing, whereas if I'd maybe slept in until 7:30, I would have been in bed longer, but I almost don't wake up feeling as rested. I feel a little bit more sluggish.
I actually really think we can oversleep, and I think if you're going to bed really late, sometimes you actually are going to have to go to sleep, wake up a little bit later. Ideally, we just stop going to bed so late though. That is a really important thing for our brain. I always have this mentality in my head with the going to sleep component. Is my grandpa used to say this sentence: an hour before midnight is worth 2 after. And that's actually true in the research. You see that the brain will enter deeper sleep before midnight. And you think for hunter-gatherers, particularly in the winter months when it got dark at 4, can you imagine what time? They probably went to sleep at 7 p.m, I reckon. I don't reckon they were awake that much after dark for a long period of time. And then I reckon they were having big sleeps in the winter months. Whereas because of artificial light, we can go to bed midnight in the winter, which is just very unnatural. And I do think if I go to sleep I always really want to be asleep at 10. That's always my goal. If I can be asleep at 10, I know it's going to be a banging day the next day.
You've got those 2 hours that count as 4.
Definitely. And if I say for example on a Saturday, if I let my alarm just not run and I'll sleep, if I did sleep at 8:30, I'll actually feel more tired than if I'd woken up at 7 a.m. Groggy, because I think my brain was no, I've had enough sleep, and then it's overdoing it. So yeah, you want to get the quantities right.
It's a funny one.
And being excited about something is important. Having something you think, I'm going to take that on tomorrow. That's cool.
Yeah, purpose matters, doesn't it? And the pursuit of that. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to serotonin is our food and how that interacts with our body. Yeah, so when food enters our body, it's going to impact both dopamine and serotonin. You'll have a pleasure aspect of food, which is the dopamine component. And then you'll have the gut health component, which is what's actually happening in the gut when the food gets there. 90% of the serotonin chemical is being generated in the gut. And if great nutrient-dense food turns up, like bananas or fish or meat or eggs or yogurt, all the stuff we ate for hundreds of thousands of years, our body breaks that down into different amino acids, and it will then utilize those chemical structures in order to build serotonin.
And that's why, like, when you go on really like healthy, clean diets, not like super restrictive eating, just eating natural foods, you do feel better in your head. Your energy levels are better, your mood is better, and you are just like emotionally more stable when the nutrients are good. And the opposite can occur when we consume a lot of these ultra processed foods. My girlfriend's really got like a speciality in this, and she's really impacted my relationship with food, because I used to think like buying a 20-gram protein yogurt, for example, was quite a good food decision, because I thought I want high protein levels, and you do want high protein levels. But then I started really looking at the ingredients on a lot of the products I was eating, and came to discover that a lot of it is full of shit, and you're being kind of fooled by the front of a packet.
And the branding.
Yeah, and the branding, and thinking, wow, this looks really good. High protein, 20 grams, all those words you see.
It's inflammatory a lot of the time. That's one of the key terms.
It's really tough on the gut. Like all these different like emulsifiers and additives and oils and stuff, they're entering the gut, and our stomach really does struggle with them. And I actually had such an interesting experience, because she's got me really dialed in on eating just single ingredient natural foods. And like, I love the diet that we're eating now. It's just full of like eggs and meat and fish and yogurt and fruits and vegetables. And it's really good. I feel great on it.
It's more satiating as well, which is great for people like you and I that are super busy.
Yeah.
You don't want to be like, hunger's a good signal at times. We don't want to ignore what our human instincts are telling us. But after we eat, we like to feel full, and then we can move on to the next thing, whether it's a task, a walk, training,
Definitely.
whatever it is we want to do.
Satisfied with the food. And I don't say this because like, oh, I'm so amazing, but we've actually managed something like 4 or 5 months without eating one of these ultra processed food ingredients, because we just thought, well, let's really see how hard it is to actually do that, because we want to recommend to the members of Dose Lab that they could do this, and we really wanted to test it. And last night I was coming to Edinburgh, and we had a tricky situation with a train, ended up getting to the station really late to make that train, and then we couldn't buy any food before we got on this train, and I'd eaten like nothing all day, and it got to about 5 p.m. and I was starving last night, and they brought these wraps round on the train, and it was like a spinach and chickpea wrap, and like on the front you would think this is a healthy wrap, and I looked at the ingredients, and me and George literally had like a 5-minute deliberation over whether I was going to eat this wrap, because we had done so long without these ultra processed foods, and this wrap looked healthy visually, looked healthy based on the packet, but we counted it, and there was about 64 things in this wrap, which is just crazy that you can put 64 things in a chickpea wrap. And I was like, okay, fuck it, I'm going to eat it, I'm so hungry. And the impact it has had on my gut throughout the night, I was waking in the night and my gut was like churning. It never does that anymore. And I felt kind of like irritated after I'd eaten it. And I think I've had like, because I'd gone so cold turkey, I really experienced what these chemicals are doing in our bodies. And if we can, and I don't mean you have to go so extreme as to quit it all and be absolutely perfect, but if you can just start recognizing I don't want all these emulsifiers and additives and stuff, I think it can be significant.
One of the biggest things that I use, and I've said many times in the podcast, to assess the quality of your habits is when you remove them. How do you feel? What happens?
Yeah.
So when you've removed processed foods, you felt great. When you've reintroduced it, albeit briefly, your body's giving you this warning sign.
Yeah.
Like my hangovers when I drink are absolutely crippling. I went something like 900 days without a single drink.
Holy shit, that's a long time.
And then since then, I've maybe drank once or twice a year, just when maybe I've been on holiday at a beach club, or we've had a big celebration. I've decided, right, I'm going to drink. And I binge drank because I don't get anything from one or two. And I appreciate that's not a healthy approach. But my hangovers are absolutely awful, because my body's like, this is so bad for you. Whereas like my friends who I've been out with that night, they maybe do it once a month or once every 8 weeks. So a lot of my friends aren't heavy drinkers. And their hangover is nowhere near as bad as mine, because their body's slightly used to dealing with with the toxins.
For sure. Like having a chickpea wrap would never do anything most of the time to people, but it's only because I'd had such a clean period that I could notice it. And you're right with the booze. Like when you come off the booze and then you have the booze, you really discover what the booze is actually doing.
I want to talk about the last hormone, which is in relation to endorphins. What are some of the symptoms of low endorphins?
We'll feel kind of like stressed and pissed off and frustrated if we're low in endorphins. And that's a pretty common feeling these days, that just feeling of like annoyed anger in your body and stress in your mind. And it's so interesting this, because a huge amount of the conversation on stress is all about like how do we kind of calm ourselves down more? How do we create like really relaxing home environments? And how do we do breathing methods? And all of those things are really good for calming your system. And I would recommend doing them. When you look evolutionarily at stress, we weren't getting stressed by so much different stuff. We weren't getting stressed by like someone's political opinion and then something in our bank account and then something that happened with work or something message someone sent us on Slack. It's like, it's not loads of stuff. It used to be we were either starving hungry or something was going to kill us. Like those are the two things that were like extremely stressful experiences for our brain. And the big thing to understand is over hundreds of thousands of years, if we were extremely stressed in our mind through one of those sources, physical action is what would come next. We'd either have to go hunting for food and try and find it in an extreme state of hunger, or we'd have to try and fight an animal or run from an animal or whatever it might be. And when our body was building up this like pent up stress within us, we would then physically take action and the endorphins would release in our brain to de-stress our mind in that environment to maximize our chance to survive in that situation. And I think a lot of the time now we feel super stressed and then we kind of just physically hold that and like let it seep and live
Tightening
within our
stomach.
body, and we don't like let it out of us. And it's very important to associate, like if I've been stressed, I need to physically release it from my system.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And I think people feel like they're maybe in a constant state of tension nowadays. And I know exactly what that feels like when, as you say, you're getting bombarded from multiple sides and domains which we're just not evolutionarily used to.
Yeah.
It's just about building coping mechanisms that we can maybe use to make us release those endorphins on a regular basis. This episode will come out first, but spoke to a gentleman yesterday, Adam Sinclair, runs like 8 different removals and self-storage businesses across Scotland. He's absolutely smashed it.
Wow.
But staff in that space is so stressful.
Yeah.
Somebody calls in sick, they've got a 6-bedroom house or a 2-story office block that they're removing stuff from. That makes a material impact.
Yeah.
He trains first thing in the morning, 45 minutes on an erg, on a bike, with weights, smashing it. And he says he comes away ready to deal with anything because his dopamine's spiked.
Yeah.
And he's rough and ready. The guy played pro rugby in France, South Africa, and he jokes himself. He's like, I'm not the most articulate, I'm not the smartest guy, but I understand how I'm wired. And my God, he understands how he's wired when he's doing that to prepare him for the day ahead.
He does. And he's in that situation building dopamine through effortful action, but he's also elevating the endorphins through the physical exertion. And it's really important to understand that if your endorphins are higher at the start of the day, your capacity to tolerate the stress that comes in your direction is much better. And therefore, if we do exercise in the morning, we've got this elevated endorphins, we're just going to be so much more capable at dealing with, something pisses us off or whatever it might be. Whereas if you're waking up, we're on the phone, we're crashing it, we don't do any physical action, then something stressful comes, like our system just doesn't have the capacity to cope as well.
Is me jumping in the cold water first thing in the morning giving me ability to cope with hard things later?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting, the cold, because you're also putting yourself into physical pain. You're not just doing something challenging for your mind, which is dopamine. You're doing physical pain. So you are getting endorphins and you're getting the experience of the dopamine. The cold water immersion is an interesting one because you've also got adrenaline is going up because your body's preparing for danger. So there's like a multitude of things that are occurring in the cold. And I think that's why it's become so popular in the modern world, because so much of the difficulty we're facing now is just a low level of activation of all of these key chemicals, especially like serotonin, endorphins. Like they're just low. They're not necessarily being spiked and crashed out. They're just low. And when you do the cold water, a lot of stuff is going up. So it's very reassuring for people like, okay, this is going to get me going.
Talk to me about singing, TJ.
Singing is ridiculously good for the endorphins. I think lots of us will have had like a moment in our life where maybe we've been driving a car and we've been listening to our favorite song. Maybe no one else was in the car and we've really gone for it with a song and thought like, wow, I'm actually quite a good singer. Even if you're shit at singing, you can kind of convince yourself you're a good singer. And it creates like a really euphoric moment. Some people may have been to like a silent disco before where you go like to one of those clubs where you have headphones on and because no one's insecure, because no one can hear anyone's voices, like everyone's really singing and everyone's like the happiest you've ever seen them. And when we sing, it still has this benefit of like extreme physical exertion on the body. And if you hum to a song or you really sing a song, you'll notice you feel really good when you sing in comparison to humming. And it's this physical exertion. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans always had a relationship with like chanting and sounds. Like if you look at these tribes like the Hadza in Central Africa or Central Australian tribes or the Maori tribes in New Zealand, they always had a relationship with making sound with their voices effectively. And it's very, very good for our brain and body if we do it.
Even religious elements understood this. So church on a Sunday, they sing.
For sure, they sing.
And it's this expression and almost elevates you.
It does. The church is actually particularly interesting because you actually get a lot of dose from the church. Like I wasn't raised in a religious environment, so I didn't really know much about the church, and we've gone to the church a bit over the last few years just to like see what that experience is like and start doing some prayer and stuff like that. And you get like this kind of focus and phone detoxing element of dopamine. You get a lot of connection of oxytocin and gratitude. You'll get the serotonin element of like the calming, and you'll do some like breathing when you're there because of the singing, and you'll do all this singing. So yeah, church is good. And I think humans love singing, and I think we could do it more.
I have this thing that I do every year on my birthday. So last year it was like 23 lessons at 32. The year before that it was 13 lessons or thoughts at 31. And one of them, I can't remember which year it was music that takes mood.
Okay.
And I know that when somebody goes through a breakup, they have like a breakup playlist
They
sometimes.
do. It can go
and
deep.
it's sad songs.
It can.
And it's like emotional.
Yeah.
And do you remember the series on Netflix, 13 Reasons Why?
Yeah.
It was about the person that killed himself.
Yeah.
Hannah, I think her name was some of that. Anyway,
Yeah.
And the soundtrack for that was really emotive.
Yeah.
And I remember watching it, and I think it was well structured because the music would like make you feel sad, and the playlist was like getting pushed on Spotify because everyone was listening to it. And I was like, oh, all the songs are really sad, and I feel really down when I hear that. And I remember the theme song playing and my brother having it on the flat and me being like, we need to get that off.
Yeah.
Because I'm feeling like down, and I'm a really happy guy in general, really high energetic. And in contrast, if I think about before I maybe open a StreamYard with a guest that I'm super excited to speak to, maybe a little bit nervous, but I channel it as excitement.
Yeah.
Or if I'm going into a presentation where I'm like, okay, I need to feel sharp, I'll listen to something that makes me feel a little bit bouncy, a little bit euphoric.
Nice.
And that I can maybe sing along to. So like I was singing in the shower this morning because I was feeling great and I was excited for it. And there's an element of the water and cleaning yourself and going through that process and having a song on is really helpful too.
Cool.
And I honestly don't do it enough. But when I think about the states when I'm coming out and I'm like, whoa, I feel really good, my music that I've chosen to listen to and sing along to has dictated the mood thereafter.
It's huge. It really is huge. And I've been through a lot of phases with music, of listening to like sad music at times. I also listen to like, when I was in my like really party phase of my life, I listened to quite a lot of like hardcore rap type music where they were kind of rapping about how like loads of things were screwing them up and all that kind of stuff. And like, I realized when I listened to it now, like, wow, that was really programming how I was feeling about life and stuff like that. So I think it's important to consider what is the music you're listening to. And sometimes it could be beneficial to listen to sad music. Like with that idea of facing the shark earlier with the emotions, if you're going through a breakup, really the most important thing is to allow yourself to experience the pain of that breakup and not like channel it into the alcohol and the phone and stuff like that. It's just like to be sad and to grieve the experience. And if you're going to listen to some sad music going through a breakup and cry and just like grieve the loss of that human that was really special to you, that's like a good way of processing that emotion. But then months later, as you're coming through it, you want to be careful of going back to that music. I think a lot of the time, just listening to positive, uplifting music is a smart move. Like I have some songs that I particularly love. I'll put them in the car when I'm on my way to like big events and stuff, and I'll fucking go for it.
That's brilliant. You have a trigger song almost?
Yeah, I have this one song called Spirit Bird by Xavier Rudd, and he's singing about like the Aborigine tribes getting screwed over when people move to Australia. And it was actually my favorite song before I even met my Australian girlfriend. And
it was meant to be.
It's just like, it's a very powerful song about like fighting for something you really care about. And I really care about this stuff, but it's also like a positive song. And I will go for it with this song. And like it creates one of the most positive states that I can experience as a human.
Yeah, the first time that I maybe experienced this and I didn't understand it in the way that I do now is having particular songs that I listen to before a hard set in the gym.
Yeah.
And I've been training for like 15 years now. And there's particular songs that I hear that I remember that I used to listen to in the rugby club gym when I was first like 15, 16, always a really small guy, always a little bit diminutive, always a little bit shy. To build the type of person I am now where I've got a great physique and I'm really confident in myself and I'm able to be expressive and I put myself out there on the internet for people to see and hear and listen to. A lot of those songs take me back to that time when I was like in the grinding phase and I was pushing and I was building. Cool. And I really remember like how I felt during that time. And I remember some of the hard sets I did on the leg press or the squats or the bench when I was doing those. And those really speak to me. So people having like a motivational gym playlist, you can maybe have like a start the day playlist or a shift the mood playlist. So if you are like feeling that stressed, angry, is there a song that you can listen to and sing to and bob along to that shifts that and like is your opportunity to switch?
Definitely. I think it's a smart move. And the one additional song I would have in your life is something that is very good at calming you. Not like in the direction of like feeling sad, but just calming you down big time. Because I heard this song, it's called like Hymn, and I heard it randomly I was just listening to music on the way to one of my final exams in my third year of university. And my third year of university was like one of the hardest I ever worked in my life. Like I really wanted to come out with a really solid degree before I went into the masters. And I pushed myself for like 90 to 120 days, the hardest I'd ever done before in my life. And I heard this song on the way to this final exam, and I actually like cried on the way to the exam at the relief of the fact I'd finally got to this like summit of getting to this point of finishing these exams. But it wasn't like crying of sadness. It was like a really calming relief feeling of like, fuck, I've made it here. And then I didn't listen to that song again until my next really significant moment. I had this speech at Oxford University about 9 months later, and I decided to listen to it again, like, hey, I've got to the next milestone. And it really calmed me again and was really effective. And I've now only listened to this song maybe 8 times in my life, only at the most high pressure, most significant moments I've ever been in. And every time it is so effective. Like it completely settles me and chills me out. So if ever you find a song you think, wow, that had a really profound effect on me, almost save it, don't overplay it like crazy, and save it for big moments. And I found it really powerful.
That's given me almost goosebumps thinking about how that song must make you feel.
It's massive. I literally have goosebumps, and it creates like this massive emotion in me. It's really interesting. And when I went to Australia for the first time to meet Georgia, I was on a like breakfast morning TV show there. And it was the first time I'd ever been on TV, and I'd only met her like 2 days before. And we were sitting outside the studio, and I needed to listen to that song. I was like, fuck, this is a big moment. I've never been on TV at this point. And like TV is super scary because there's like so much pressure and it's live. And I sat on this bench. She was like, what are you going to do? And I sat and listened to this song, and like, it was really interesting for her to watch what it did to me. Like I went from like really anxious and stressed to just like, right, I'm locked in. I'm ready to rock. So it's good to have something like that. Music's so powerful.
Good. People need to find those songs for them and use them strategically to dictate their outcomes.
Yeah, I would say the most important thing is you then just don't listen to the song regularly, because otherwise it will completely lose its power. So if you find a song you really love and it has a calming effect, save it and make it that song for you.
Yeah, I love that, TJ. TJ, I've had so much fun today. I'm sure the listeners have as well. But I want to ask you on a personal level before we wrap up, what's the main thing that you're working on from like a chemical or a behavioural perspective right now?
In my own personal life? Yeah. I would say reducing this glutamate chemical in my brain. I honestly would. And I'd love to just rap with this chemical, because this is something I only discovered about 9 months ago. I started properly reading the research on glutamate and trying to really understand what's going on here. Glutamate is this chemical that enables decisions to be made in our brain. You have synaptic connections in your brain, like 2 bits of a synapse, and they'll talk to one another. And for any decision to be made, a little glutamate molecule has to cross that synapse effectively. And we as humans obviously make a lot of decisions. To put some numbers on it, it's hypothesized that when we were hunter-gatherers, we were making about 2,500 decisions a day. So you can imagine about 2,500 of these glutamate molecules transferred in our brain on all the different tiny decisions you're making, where you're walking, what you're cooking, who you're talking to. Like, we're just making decisions. In the modern world, in research, we actually know this is the case now. We're making about 35,000 decisions a day. So we have scaled that up like crazy. And what basically happens is every time you're making a glutamate-based decision, like all decisions, glutamate is transferring across. But what's happening is we're making too many decisions that the synapse is getting blocked in glutamate. It's all getting held and clogged effectively on the synapse. And if your brain is feeling really full and really busy and foggy and you can't really think and you almost can't make a decision, that's because of an overwhelming level of glutamate buildup. And I've started to see this in my brain. Like, I'll reach a point where I'm like, fuck, my brain is just like, it's not working. And now I visually know that like all these glutamate molecules are sitting there, and I'm really actively every day trying to make decisions that's then reducing my glutamate.
Really interesting. What are some of the things that you're doing? Are you building more of a routine? Are you making less choices?
There are some really like clear ways that you can just lower the chemical. Napping is ridiculously good for lowering glutamate. Sometimes you might notice that if you have a nap, you wake up and just feel a bit clearer, especially if it's a short nap. If you nap for ages, you enter
One of my friends loves NSDR for 20 minutes, and he will use that quite regularly after a really heavy morning block of work. He'll nap or NSDR, and then his afternoon is more strategic.
Definitely. So the nap is good. You're literally lowering the molecule because you're not making any decisions whilst you're asleep. Your brain is like maybe having some dream type stuff, but you're not making any active decisions. So glutamate is just immediately plummeting. And nature is ridiculously effective for this. There's this big theory called attention restoration theory, which has been here for about 30 years now, And it really shows that our attention spans improve the more we spend time in nature, because effectively our brain just gets much more rest in nature than in the modern intensity of like cities and phones and cars and all the just intensity that occurs. So I'm trying to high dose on the nature, especially on the weekends. And I'm trying to make sure I just get significant periods of rest in the afternoon for a little period of time. And it's almost, those two things are really important, but it's almost in my head just having it as a framework of, I think I've been making too many decisions, I've built up too much glutamate, I'm going to go and not make any decisions. And I'm going to sit, I'm going to watch YouTube, like a podcast for half an hour, and I'm just going to try and not make any decisions throughout this period of time. Or sometimes on like a Saturday, me and my girlfriend will wake up and what should we do today? Let's do this. Should we do that? Should we do this? And then I'll be like, fuck, this is just building my glutamate even on a day off. And I'll sometimes just say to Georgia, I'll be like, this is a low glutamate day. We're going to make no decisions. We're just going to do what we're doing right now. And then once we're done with this, we're going to do the next thing. And then when we're done with that, we're just going to do the next thing. And just stop trying to like plan your whole life so methodically.
I'm a heavy planner and I definitely benefit from it because I have built into my diary and my time for nothingness.
Yeah, nice.
And down regulation. But I completely resonate with the times where you have a day where it's a bit more open and your brain is like used to the structure.
Definitely.
And you're like, oh my goodness, what I'm going to do. But then there's things that I'll do that will remove decision fatigue. So I eat a lot of the same meals. I get meal prep delivered to my house. And then outside of that, I probably have 2 or 3 meals that I cook or I make up that are regular. For presentations, for podcasts, I probably have 5 or 6 different combinations of trousers or chino trousers and t-shirt or polo shirt that I wear that try and make me not worry about, oh, well, am I going to wear these shoes with these trousers or whatever? Like this that I'm wearing today, I wore for a talk that I gave last Friday and I knew it looked fine. So I was like, right, cool, I can wear that and I don't need to think about putting together outfits. So trying to lower those decisions can be really helpful. There's a reason Steve Jobs was wearing the black t-shirt all the time.
He looked cool in that top as well. Definitely, if you can just set up a life that requires less decisions. It's so interesting with planning because I have to be ridiculously planned in my career. Like my calendar is carnage and it has to be all so strategically laid out. But I grew up as someone that like was desperate for my weekend to look really fun and busy, like partying and nights out. I'm going to this gathering and that barbecue, loads of busyness. And now the most exciting weekend to me is the one that says nothing is happening and I'm just going to go into it with no objective and I'm just going to do nothing. And that won't actually be nothing. It'll end up being walks and like cooking some cool food and maybe going for a coffee with someone. But it's more like deciding in the moment than thinking we always have to have the perfect weekend planned
It's
out.
great to have that yin and yang between hyper on, high achiever, pushing TJ and down regulated, chilled, open to experience TJ.
Yeah, there's a version of TJ that sits and does nothing, and it's an important one for me to really prioritize.
Nice, really cool note for us to wrap up on TJ. I'm sure people have loved the conversation. Where should they head towards to continue it with you?
Yeah, if you go to TJ Power on Instagram, that's my main place that I share these ideas. I've got this book called The Dose Effect. And then if you actually want to join Dose and join a membership where you can track your brain chemistry and really optimize this stuff, it's at thedoselab.com.
All 3 of those will be linked in the show notes. Thank you, TJ. It's been a pleasure. And thank you to the listener. I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.